Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everybody. So, have you ever tried to change and it's super, super difficult to change and it feels like you're making all the right habits, you're doing all the right things, but then you get snapped back? And today we're going to talk about why that is and what happens and how you can work through that. Why is it so hard to change and what you can do about it? So, a lot of it, when we talk about change, we're really talking about our change of being, right? So we talked about being last time, and being is really built into three parts, right? So you have your being, right, which is the physical aspect here, like in the physical plane. But then we also have your mental aspect, which is basically the way you think and your thoughts, right? And that's your thinking. And then right here at the bottom, we have what we would call your spirit, or like your feelings, right? And this is going into your emotions, right? And so when you have your emotions, which is through you feel through your spirit, your mental, which you perceive with your thinking, and then your being, which you perceive through your physical existence, all this makes up who you are, right? And so in order to change that, we have to start at the most fundamental aspects. Now, a lot of times when we start out, a lot of times we focus on the physical. So we talk about things like actions. We talk about things like habits. We might even get a little deeper and get into things like our thinking or our beliefs. But this is all mental still and doesn't actually get to the very core of it, which right here is the spiritual and emotional side. Now, if you guys watched my last video, which I'll put up on the card and recommend as well, I talked about basically what happens when I basically created a roadmap for all 7 degrees that we needed to, right? And part of the degrees is essentially just where you're going through with the 7 degrees of law, where we talked about it. So if you haven't seen that video, go check that out, because I was going to be referring to it, where we talk about the 7 degrees of law and basically the tag phrase, which is the law you live by is going to dictate your reality. So the level of law which you live by will dictate your reality. Now, getting into what specifically that means, let's talk about that in terms of our being and in terms of what reality is and what is exactly we're trying to change. Because it's a pretty simple thing and a pretty simple concept when we're talking about change. So, by the way, if you want, you can sit down, right? It's no big deal. So, I was just talking to my assistant there, no big deal. So, guys, when we talk about change, it's about understanding what is it we mean when we're actually going to change, right? So say, for instance, I'm here in New York City, right? New York City. And I want to go to Los Angeles, right? This is not a geographical representation of what is actually going on, just a physical representation. Obviously, I need to go and travel. I might get through Chicago. I might go here and be through Indiana. Then I might hit Arizona. And then finally, I end up here in LA. And what happens with a lot of people's thinking is they want to get to LA. LA is the goal, and they're here in New York. They'll say something to the effect, their thinking is, I'm not in LA. They'll be like, well, I'm not in LA, I'm in Chicago. I'm not in LA, I'm in Indiana. I'm not in LA, I'm in Arizona. And rather than recognizing they're making progress towards whatever change they're trying to do, they'll get impatient. They'll be like, I'm not where I want to be yet, right? And so they'll go back to New York where it's comfortable. And it's like, well, duh, right? You're not going to get to New York to LA instantly. It's not a teleportation. You have to, even if you go by plane and it's a straight shot, it's still, there's a travel time, right? And if you're going by ground, it's a very complex, or you're going to hit all these different cities. You're going to be in Pittsburgh, You might be in Philadelphia. You're going to get all these little cities in between, right? And so the reality is when we're making changes to our being, it's no different. We have to know where our being is at in relation to everything else. Now, we talked about what is that roadmap and how do we actually make that change. So how do we figure out where we are, right? Well, first off, you got to figure out where you are with your emotions, right? And the best way to figure that out is using the Hawkins scale, which we talked about, the Hawkins scale of consciousness. Now, this is going to be divided into basically 3 main parts, right? So here we're going to call it suffering. Here we're going to call this getting by. Actually, getting by is a lot thinner. It's going to be more like this, right? Getting by. And then after that, we're going to call this flow. And then just like enlightenment, peace, yada, 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 right? There. Right at the top. And so you got to start with your emotions and be like, okay, when I sit down by myself and I embrace the silence of my life, how do I feel? What's the emotions there? Now, if you feel things like fear, desire, apathy, you know in terms of the Hawkins scale, you're right down here. And if you guys remember, with the 7 degrees of law, there are 7 degrees, you're probably living by the 7th degree of law. If you're feeling things like complexity, confusion, and general not content. So generally, if you're negative, it's because you're living by this degree of law. So you know emotionally, all right, I'm down here. That's where I'm at emotionally, right? And chances are, if that's where you are emotionally, you're probably mentally down there as well with a lot of your thinking. So these thoughts, when you have these emotions, might be like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I don't like, etc. And then how does that show up in your life? Well, the physical reactions are maybe you get sick. Maybe you work a job you don't like. Maybe you have a bad relationship. There's a lot of ways this can show up in your being, right? And then, maybe you're broke and you have no money, right? So these are examples of how from your emotional state, you're going to see your thoughts, your thinking right here. And this is going to show up in your being, how you're living here on the planet. So you might get sick, you might work a job you hate, you might have a bad relationship, no money. All these things are related. So you might be like, how do I change that then? What are you saying? I've got to change the way I feel? It feels impossible if I want to make a change. Well, yes, of course. But remember, if we're trying to get to here and we want to feel things like peace, joy, and reason, you got to travel all the way up these emotions. And this is where it gets really difficult. And so I had a friend recently, things were going pretty well for her, and she started increasing. And she started having really, really accelerated thinking, right? So her thoughts from going kind of slow started to really speed up. And she started to feel things like anxiety, and maybe even some like negative emotions, so something like maybe some anger, things like that. Thing is, when you get out of fear and desire, before you start stepping into the big emotions of getting by, you have to go through the emotion of courage, right? This is the big emotion here. And so in order to move through that, you have to start feeling anger, anxiety, you got to start feeling pride, which a lot of people, we say, oh, it's not good to feel these things, but that's usually an indicator that your vibration is raising. And usually what will happen is you'll feel like you have this like energy inside of you can't contain. That feeling is going to get more and more intense once you start getting into peace, joy, reason, and love. those feelings do not go away. They just get more and more excited. And it's because what's happening is your vibration is beginning to speed up. And when you have more accelerated vibration, obviously what a thought that you might have that might take you 1 week to process, now you're processing it in just a couple hours. You're processing it in like say 3 hours. So because this process is speeding up, obviously it's just you're going to need to have a larger container. You're going to start expanding your being, but that's super uncomfortable if you're not used to it, right? And so as a result of that, you're just going to be in these places in between where you're not feeling love, you're not feeling joy, but you're no longer in the familiarity of fear and apathy. You're just going to be feeling all these feelings like anxiety, anger, and you're going to be really, really dealing with this courage. And courage is really difficult because it's where you flip from having the last. So courage is very interesting because courage is the bridge, right? And when it's the bridge, you would call it the last negative emotion. As well as the first positive. But really you move into neutral emotions like that. And so what happens is when you're moving into courage, and courage is becoming a lifestyle, you are going to be feeling this anxiety a lot because you're being courageous. You're suddenly facing everything. Everything becomes a dragon. Everything becomes something you need to conquer. And it's basically going from this life of where you were able to sit back and you were in fear of the dragon. Now you're fighting the dragon every day. And you're getting beat up, you're getting smacked down, you're getting tossed around. And that doesn't feel fun. There's a reason. Like a lot of people say, well, why do people just stay in like misery and apathy and fear and guilt and shame? Because nobody wants to get beat up by a dragon all day. It's exhausting. And it's not a fun feeling, right? But that's the only way you get into the higher states of consciousness. In order to move from New York to LA, if you're going to walk by ground, you have to fly over or walk through Chicago or the Midwest. You got to fly, you got to do it. There's no physical, or you can take the really long way around and, not go over the US. You can just fly over the Atlantic, fly over Europe, fly over Asia, fly over the Pacific, and then get to LA that way. But that's even longer. Or you can just go through and fly over, but there's no way around it. You have to go through it, and you cannot skip these steps. You cannot go from being a fearful, desirous person to feeling complete love, flow, and joy without being courageous, without having tough conversations, without learning what it is I think, without learning how to be yourself, without living and embodying courage. You can't feel these emotions. It's just not possible. So you have to go through it. Just like physically, and we understand that in the physical world. I cannot just magically teleport. I mean, you can in the physical world, but that's beside the point, right? But you can't just magically go somewhere. You have to move through it. There's a process, right? And so you have to go through that process. So the reason change is so hard is because oftentimes when we start feeling this anxiety or this courage, we've been told and programmed that this is an indicator of failure, that this is something that's going wrong, when in reality it's going right. So let's talk about this in a really, really big sense of where this stacks with your relationships and the different factors that might hold you back in this, right? Because it's not enough just to understand where I'm at. You have to understand that you are a collection of a lot of things. So we're going to talk about fourth degree law and use a framework for fourth degree law because that's the best way we're going to understand that. So fourth degree law, as you guys know, fourth degree, right? Basically 5 basic laws, right? The 5 laws are going to be obedience, sacrifice, you're going to need grace, you're going to need consecration, or for this consecration, you can just say basically commitment, if that helps you guys understand. And then after that, the last thing you're going to need is loyalty or chastity. where you don't move away from that. And when you follow all of these, you're going to be able to conquer every single bit. So we're going to do Maslow's hierarchy, but we're going to do it in reverse, just like the cone here, right? We're going to do it in reverse. So in order to get over survival, you have to obey the rules of survival, right? So you need to live by the laws of what survives. So you need to eat, you need to, drink water, you need to breathe air, like just basic survival stuff. You can't put yourself in difficult things. Sacrifice, right? Now sacrifice is all about safety. In order to have safety, well, first off, you have to be a safe person, right? And so you have to understand, what does it mean to be safe in the environment? If it means like getting shelter, if it means finding a safe place to stay or whatever. And a lot of times that comes in your relationships. So relationships is the middle here. This is the big part where a lot of people get stuck on, or we're going to talk about. And then we have esteem, which is basically what we think of ourselves and how we feel like we matter. And then over here we have actualization, right? Which is basically, this feeling everything. Now this is a reversal of when you have loyalty and chastity to your cause, you will master actualization. When you learn to consecrate and know what you're doing, you will then have esteem. When you learn to have grace with yourself and others, you will then build your relationships. If you learn to sacrifice things, so for instance, if you want safety, a lot of people find safety in money. What is that? Well, you have to work for money, right? You're making a sacrifice of either your time, your skills, your talents, your focus, whatever, to get safety, right? And then if you want survival, you have to obey the laws of survival. Don't jump off of cliffs, don't drink poison, right? Don't sleep in cold environments. You obey those laws. And when you do that, suddenly all of these things line up together, right? So when you're making that change, you have to say, okay, if I'm here in survival and I want to go here, what are the steps I need to take? Well, first off, ask yourself, from the life I'm living now, right, what are the rules of my life? And when I say that, I mean, if someone said, I want to live and be as you are, so let's say you're a depressed, fat, middle-aged old man who's got no hobbies and lives with his mom and everybody hates you, what rules would someone need to live by to be like you, right? Maybe they'd be like, I never work out, because if I worked out, I'd be healthy. So I gotta make sure I never work out. I gotta make sure that I don't read. Don't read. Because if I read, I might get smarter. And if I'm too smart, I would fix my life. I can't do that, right? I would eat junk food. Eat junk food. And then just look. Those are the rules you're living by. And what's happening is you are obeying those rules. Without it, you are obeying those rules. Those are the rules you are living by. And so because of that, you are obeying and you're sacrificing. What are you sacrificing? You're probably sacrificing your happiness. The sacrifice you're making is feeling good, right? Or positivity, or esteem. You're sacrificing all the positive things you would want for yourself. That's what you're sacrificing. So because of that, you get the grace, right? Which is essentially the time buffer between that. Because even in spite of the fact that you're totally in your miserable life, you can still, if you're watching this video, you can still turn it around. You can step away from that life if you want. So you have grace in that. So this allows your ability to choose. And then here, consecrated, you've committed to it, right? So you've committed some way, somehow, that you're never going to work out, you don't read, you're going to eat junk food, you're going to live with your mom, you're going to do whatever, and you're going to just be a loser. Not to say that anyone who's in that situation is a loser, but let's just say this is what you decide, right? I'm just giving this example. But you've committed to that. And then loyalty, meaning you don't deviate from that. You're always doing that. You're just consistently doing that. And how do we know that? Because that's the life you're living, right? So the biggest thing is, it's like, well, what happens if I want to change that? Then you just simply have to ask, what are the rules of the life I want to live? And then ask yourself that right now. What are the rules of my life, and what are the rules of the life I want? What are the rules of the life you want to live? What is the change you're trying to make? So some people might be like, I want to stop smoking. I want to stop smoking, right? And now that is the physical habit. And if you focus on the stop smoking, that might work for a little bit, but it won't be permanent, because as we know, the physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world. And that is a reflection of the mental world. So you have to ask, go deeper. When I want to stop smoking, what is the thinking behind that? What is the thoughts? I want to stop smoking because I want to have better health, because I want to live longer, because I want to have kids, because I know it's bad for me, because it's expensive, and I don't like spending money because I'm broke. So they're thinking, now you're clear on the thoughts. You know your motivation. You know what you're thinking is, your why. So let's say it's you want to save money. Let's say it's something that simple, right? Even though saving money is probably not the only reason. There's a lot of ways to save money. So save money, let's say also for your health, right? Let's say it's for that. So now you have that, but now you got to go even deeper beyond that. Now that we're beyond the thinking, we have to ask ourselves, what is the feeling, right? Because this is where we make the real change. What do I want to feel? What does it feel like to be healthy? And this is where, when we start talking about fourth degree law, it's no longer words and ideas, it's embodiment, right? It's about really fully embodying, right? Embodiment of what it is you want. This is why the emotions are so clever and so important. Because you have to embody the feeling of what it is you want. Embody what it means to be healthy. So you might be like, okay, well, I want to be healthy. I want to stop smoking. So start on the feeling. So you might ask, okay, now that I know and I understand all that I have to obey rules, I have to make the sacrifices, give myself time and grace, focus on what I want, and be loyal to it. How do I actually do that? Well, that's where we go to this place. But this is, remember, this is fourth degree law, right? Which most people aren't going to be able to live by. But if you want the hack, this is it. This is how you do it. If you live by this set of law, you're going to be able to change yourself, your embodiment like that. But in order to do and operate at this level, you need that roadmap of figuring out where you are and where you want to be. Now, if you know that I'm not exactly in fourth or fifth or sixth degree law, that's fine. But the biggest thing is you just need to know exactly where you are and where you want to go. So let's talk about how to actually do that in a practical sense. Oh, I think my board is sliding back. Sorry, guys. So how do anyway, hope all of this is making sense. It's interesting, as I'm doing more and more of these lessons, I'm learning all the different ways that I can explain different things, but it's still a process. So let's talk about stop smoking, right? Let's say that's the physical thing that we want to have happen, right? Now, getting into our being, it's really important to focus on that feeling and get to a place where we can establish the feeling first. I would say this is the number one thing. Find what makes you feel, or feel what you want to feel when you stop smoking. So for instance, in a moment where you're not smoking, right, don't think about the desire to want to smoke, because that's the feeling that's going to drive you to smoke. But if you think about the feeling of, say, when I'm not smoking or whatever, and sometimes you can even get that feeling when you are smoking, but the idea is sitting in that feeling where smoking is no longer a focus, and getting into that feeling where this thing is no longer in your life, you no longer have a need for it. A good example is like, you only think about your body when you're really sick or when you're injured, but when you're not injured and you're not sick, you don't think about your body, you just kind of move, right? It's just effortless. So you want to get to this point of effortlessness. And remember, if you're really down in shame and apathy, right? If you're really down in these lower quadrants, feeling things like anxiety or maybe even anger might be good, depending on where you're at. because you might need to be angry about smoking. You might need to get to a place where you get really, really frustrated, because that's going to get you the energy you need to move up the scale, where you can start having a plan and you can start having you can start to have more thinking towards it, rather than this desperation of survival down here. And then the idea is when you can truly evolve, when you can get out of it, is when you can get to the place emotionally. And there's a couple ways to do that. You can do that by meditation. Spending time with good people. Now, I say good people, just meaning people who are in alignment with what you want. So, i.e., people who don't smoke, right? So, if you want to smoke, the best way to do it is hang out with people you like who don't smoke. Super simple, right? And then get cigarettes out of your life or whatever. So the idea is you want to feel this first. You have to have that feeling first. And you have to get to the place where you're feeling good without cigarettes. Because if you don't know how to feel good without cigarettes, even if you quit it, it won't last, because you're going to want to go back there. So the idea is, well, there's no specific plan that I can give you. All I can say is you've got to figure out where you are emotionally, and you've got to get to a place emotionally first before you work on your thinking. And then when you work on your thinking, you start having thoughts or beliefs that work on it. Like, because right now you might have an idea that I am a smoker. But then you'll get to a place where it's like, I am a healthy person. And I am someone who takes care of my body. And then naturally what will happen is you'll have these beliefs installed as you move with your thinking. And then eventually you'll keep rising up. And then once you get into here, once you get into this flow place, this is where you start being able to really move into being a full creator, and you can start changing. You can start living by that higher degree of law. And then you just simply obey the rules of that. So to not smoke, simply don't buy cigarettes. And every time you feel the temptation to do so, you just say no. It's that simple. And then because you're emotionally in a place where you feel that and you built yourself up to a healthy person, I'm someone who takes care of my body, you can say that. Now, if you need help with this specifically, because I can write all this out and you might be like, well, that's easier said than done. If you need help, I have a link down below. You can reach out to me. I can help you apply these laws and understanding in your own life personally to fit you, move you towards your goals. Help entrepreneurs, business people, grown professionals get what they want and support them towards their goals and building a more value-aligned life. So check out the link below if you guys are interested in learning and working with me on that. But it's as simple as this, right? It doesn't really need to be more complicated than that. So it's understanding your being in terms of how you feel about whatever you're trying to change, what are your thoughts about it, and then what are the reactions in life where you are, and then focusing on that feeling and moving to a place where you can feel good about it. And when I say move to a place where you can feel good about it, it doesn't necessarily mean you feel this right away. It just means that maybe I go from being apathetic. Usually if you're at a place where you say, I want to quit smoking, that's a good sign you are in desire and you've just moved past fear. And then the next step above desire is anxiety. So you're going to work through that anxiety, and then you're going to go through anger. And then once you move through anger, you're going to go through courage. And those are typically the steps of emotions you're going to feel. So if you're in desire and you're really, 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 really wanting something, move towards whatever creates a lot of anxiety towards you. And that's going to be very, very uncomfortable. And then whatever you take that anxiety, work through that anxiety, process that, and then move towards anger. And then when you move towards anger, you're going to find pride, and then move through pride, and then move through courage. Whatever you need to do in that order, and that'll get you to stop smoking. So that means, like, if you're saying, I want to stop smoking, and you then hang out with a bunch of friends who all smoke, and you start feeling anxiety, and then one of them offers you a cigarette and you say no, and then he keeps pushing, and then you start getting anger. You release that anger and you tell him, no, I'm not trying to. You allow yourself to get angry. And then what'll happen is they'll be like, what, you think you're better than us? Oh, you think you're too good to start smoking? And you step into your pride and you say, yeah, bro, I am. I'm trying to stop. I don't think I'm better than you, but I am. And then you take the courage to speak your voice. And that's an example, practical way of how you stop smoking. Because when you can emotionally move through those steps, then you're with the thinking of, I'm someone who can hold boundaries. I'm someone who stops smoking and I'm committed to it. And then once your brain is on board, then the rest is easy. But you got to get into those feelings, and you can't fight those feelings. So when you're in desire, you can't go back into fear and be like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I can't do it. And so when your friends tell you, hey, smoke with us, you have a decision at that point. Do I have anxiety and go to anger, go to courage, and have that reaction? Or would I move back into fear because I'm afraid of what my friends will think, and then I move into that fear, and then I go back into apathy, and I say, hey, you know what? I don't care about my goal anymore. I smoke the cigarette. Then I go back into guilt and shame because I know I broke my promise to myself. That's how it works. It's as simple as that. And you just move up this feelings every single time. And if you can focus on how you're feeling and you understand, I need to feel these emotions, and you can do that. You literally can change your life on anything. And you just have to know, what emotion am I feeling right now, and what's the next emotion I need to feel, and then do whatever action, do whatever thing, move towards whatever thing is going to help you do that. This is how we go from New York to Pittsburgh, to Chicago, to Indiana, to Arizona, to Colorado, to Utah, or no, to California, to LA. This is how we do it. We do it step by step by step by step. You can't jump from LA to California. You got to take the entire journey. So what you're doing is just, usually when you say I want, you are in desire. And then just knowing what's the next step. It's that simple. So I don't know if that's fully it, but that's basically it, right? You just have to know, where am I at with my emotions and my thoughts and my feelings, and take the next step of emotions that you need to go from there. And yeah, that's how you make change, and that's why it can be so hard. But I hope that's simple, hope that makes sense, and if you guys need any more help, please like, comment, and subscribe. Any thoughts, I'd be interested on any feedback, because I want to help improve and make these things better. And I hope I was able to help you guys. Stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.